Hello there, my name is Diana Kolesnik, and now we will unveil the top news of recent days. In Ukraine, votes should now be counted in the presidential elections. After all, March the 31st is the deadline for the next presidential elections in Ukraine. However, in accordance with the current legislation of Ukraine, elections falling during martial law are postponed until its end. The powers of the president and the parliament of Ukraine are officially extended until the time of new elections and procedures for the transfer of power to the newly elected. Martial law is not a fantasy but an objective reality associated with full-scale Russian aggression, the temporary occupation of a quarter of the territory of Ukraine, and the military threat to all its citizens. And if you have listened to Russian propaganda and believe that Zelensky or his police usurped power, then I will simply state the fact. Since February the 24th, 2022, the Verkhovna Rada has already voted more than 10 times for the introduction and continuation of martial law, and every time unanimously. In Ukraine, the whole society is now united to stop and repel the Russian invasion. Already after the victory, there will be a political struggle, and now only a struggle with the aggressor. In the current conditions, it is physically impossible to ensure election security and voter representation. Therefore, the current legislation corresponds to the objective realities of war. Before the full-scale Russian invasion, elections in Ukraine were held regularly and were an effective tool for power rotation. During the period of independence, the country went through 7 presidential and 8 parliamentary campaigns. And what is remarkable, none of the presidents, except for Leonid Kuchma, stayed in office longer than 1 term. Unlike many post-Soviet states, Ukraine was fortunate to avoid a long-term dictatorship and maintain a pluralistic and competitive political environment. Ukraine is a country of established democracy in which the opposition has always influence and real chances to gain power in elections. It was the war that forced the electoral process to be put on hold. As soon as the threat passes, the country will return to the usual rhythm of political life. You know, it's much more honest not to hold elections during a war than to hold them the way the Kremlin did, with almost 80% turnout, with 90% support in the occupied territories. For Russians, the pseudo-election farce has nothing to do with self-determination and democracy. In Russia, the elections have long turned into a ritual event, which is in no way capable of shaking Putin's dictatorship. Thus, the aggressor state conducts its own elections and even arranges them on foreign but temporarily occupied territories. But the Russian elections are not about the manifestation of will, but about the imitation of the unity and cohesion of the subjects around their leader. Starting today, another wave of military conscription begins in Russia, although it would be correct to say mobilization. According to the decree of the usurper Putin, 150,000 people will be sent to the army in the spring. Formally, these men are not sent to war, but in fact, they are forced through pressure to sign contracts and die in Ukraine. But the most important thing is that mobilization will be especially tough in the regions that Russia has already occupied, and therefore, if the Kremlin captures Ukraine, then rest assured that Europe will fight against the Ukrainians. Not by our will, but with the help of threats, executions, and repressions, Moscow will be able to do this. Kremlin leaders have experience for more than 100 years, if not more. As the experts said, the hype died down after the elections and the military commissars took up forced mobilization. As always, the first to be hit are the regions that are particularly remote from Moscow and St. Petersburg. But the problem is that in these regions there is already a shortage of men. This is not surprising since Russian generals continue to use mere assaults and have already lost almost 500,000 soldiers in 2 years of war. But the Russian military has reportedly started recruiting personnel for elements of the newly recreated Leningrad military district. The UK Ministry of Defense reported that the 44th Army Corps began recruitment in Luga, Leningrad Oblast. The UK Ministry of Defense stated that Russia has previously committed newly established establish units to operations in Ukraine, and that Russian need to continue operations in Ukraine has impeded its wider force generation efforts. Sanctions limited supplies for the Russian defense industry, which affected Russia's ability not only to manufacture, but also to sell weapons, the British Ministry of Defense reported. Sanctions are likely to continue to disrupt both supply and demand for Russian arms exports, and significantly complicate payment mechanisms for Russia. This has almost certainly led to a significant reduction in Russian arms exports and increased delays in deliveries, including to some of Russia's most important remaining arms buyers, according to British intelligence. According to the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute, Russia's share of the global arms trade has fallen to 11% over the past 5 years, compared to 21% in the previous review. In addition, data from the Bank on Finland show that third countries spend more than 60% when exporting certain goods from Russia that are subject to sanctions. And the production of new weapon systems has an increased dependence on foreign components and technologies. While Russia has increased production of key munitions most often used in Ukraine, the impact of the sanctions is likely to be most felt on Russia's modern and sophisticated weapon systems. However, Russia continues to find ways to circumvent sanctions. It manages to obtain foreign components, and American components are still found in Russian weapons.
Ход санкций для России чревато только тем, что они
Circumventing sanctions for Russia is fraught only with the fact that they cannot directly receive dual-use goods. Well, or understandably, military goods directly. They have to look for these opportunities to circumvent. So they pay, I emphasize again, a 300% premium. If they bypass them, you get microchips for the production of the same Iskander-M or caliber, and they pay a premium accordingly.
For example, the missiles with which Russia attacked Kiev on March the 21st contained at least 1,500 foreign components, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said. According to him, each Russian strike indicates that the world's sanctions against Moscow are not yet sufficient, as each Russian missile contains foreign components. A significant part of them is what is made by companies of the free world and imported into Russia through various grey schemes. Blocking such schemes and all those who support them is a must. More sanctions are needed. More accountability for sanctions evasion schemes is needed. That concludes today's video. Thank you for watching. Stay updated, comment, like and subscribe to our UATV English channel for more news from Ukraine. Your support really matters. Goodbye.